Am I on? Okay. It was tempting to just do it from over there because I got remotes for everything. I could just stay on the sofa. I like this new arrangement. We've got the puppy here. You ever heard of Pavlov's dogs? You know the experiment that he did where he got the dogs he taught them that whenever he rang a bell, he would feed them. And so they got to anticipate every time they heard the bell, they thought they were going to get fed, so they would start salivating. And it got to the point whether he fed them or not, if he rang the bell, they salivated. And so that was his experiment. That's called classical conditioning. And believe it or not, our world is programming us just like he programmed those dogs. We're being conditioned. Some of it we might be aware of, some of it we're not. Let's run the video. See what's happening? And believe it or not, that's what our world is conditioning us to do. We're taught to respond in certain ways to certain things. And the problem with that is that a lot of that conditioning is setting us up to fail. You see, this is Benjamin Franklin. Look what he said. Everybody knows you can trust Benjamin Franklin. He says you can do anything you set your mind to, right? Well, I always wanted to be an NBA basketball player. I stopped growing about 20 centimeters too soon, and I'm about 2 steps too slow. Guess what? No amount of work is going to compensate for that. Benjamin Franklin lied to me. He set me up to fail. I can't do anything I set my mind to. But we hear that. And there's a guy wrote a poem. It's not just something recently. How many of you in here have ever heard of a guy named William Ernest Henley? He was a Victorian poet, wrote that poem in about 1875. Hardly anybody's ever heard of him. The name of the poem is Invictus. You know that? No? Yeah, well, the last 2 lines, everybody knows. You ever heard that? I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. You've all heard that? You know what that implies? That I control my destiny. Things are going to happen the way I want them to happen because I'm in control of things, right? Just by willpower and hard work, I can control what happens to me. Is that true? What do you think about Oprah? Everyone gets a trophy, right? We live in a society where we think that's supposed to happen. In fact, there's a book aimed at millennials that the title of the book is Not Everyone Gets a Trophy. Because we're taught to think that all we have to do is show up and do something and it'll work the way we want it to. Guess what? It doesn't. Yeah. If you can't read it, what it says on the cup, it says College Participation Award. He didn't really accomplish a whole lot, but he went to college, and so he should get a good job. And he's coming face to face with reality. So it's not working, is it? The danger is if we live in a world that conditions us to think that we can do anything we want, that it's all going to work out right, somebody's always going to give us a trophy just for trying, and then we could come to live in the real world. You remember, how many of you were here in November? Anybody remember what happened in November? What did we look at in November? Ecclesiastes. Were there a few problems in Ecclesiastes? Solomon's belief system and his world collided, and it didn't feel very good. So we come to that, and we get to the point where we're expecting success. We think we can accomplish whatever we want to. Somebody's going to give us a trophy, and it doesn't happen, and we begin to pull back. We start to see ourselves as a victim. I'm a victim. In fact, if I was going to put a subtitle on tonight's sermon, it would be, You Are Not a Victim. You are not a victim. It's tempting for us to see ourselves that way, but you got to avoid that because you see, here's a person, they see themselves as a victim. I'm not clumsy, but the floor hates me. It's a conspiracy. Somebody's out to get me. The floor is, the chairs are, the walls are. It's a conspiracy. I can't win because somebody's out to get me. And once we begin to get that attitude, to realize that what we were expecting, what we were hoping for, just isn't working out the way we thought it would. I haven't got my trophy yet. I haven't been drafted in the NBA yet. What's going to happen? In fact, some of you, if you're a baby boomer like me, a few years ago, the big thing in the media was midlife crisis, because baby boomers who thought we could do anything, we could conquer the world, we already had, and so we expected it to carry on. We get to the middle of our life and we look around and think, this isn't what I was expecting. So there's a crisis. And so we begin to think, and when that happens, there are several responses. We can deny it. We can just kind of go on pretending that it's working out okay, even when it's not. I used to work with a guy, I don't know if he just was so optimistic or if he had a strong case of denial, but he would go on a holiday and come back and say, well, how was your holiday? Well, our car was totaled. My son broke his leg. We spent an extra week sitting in a motel in the middle of nowhere while we were trying to get our car fixed. We couldn't get it fixed, so we had to put it on a train and ship it home because nobody has parts for it. But it was a great holiday. I think he really thought that. But to me, that seemed like a little bit of a denial. We can have anger issues, bargaining. The scary ones are the resignation, the depression. Psychologists talk about the idea of learned helplessness. If we're conditioned to think that we can do anything and it's not happening, that's a little bit disturbing. And then we develop that pattern, and we get to the point where we say, well, it's nothing I do works, why even try? And so you get to the point where you just feel helpless all the time. And that's a big problem today, because we're told we can do anything. It's good, you can accomplish what you want to, hard work, dedication, vision, and it'll happen. And sometimes it just won't. And it's often because things are beyond our control, and we begin to see ourselves as a victim. Now, what are you going to do about that? How do you deal with that when things, we leave here tonight. Somebody runs a red light and careens into us, and our life changes forever, and it was totally outside our control. How do you cope with that? How do you keep from being a victim when life doesn't turn out the way you want, the way you expect, the way you think it ought to, the way you deserve it? We're going to look at Joseph, because, you see, we tend to read Scripture with rather distorted vision sometimes, because we read it, and a lot of the stories, like Joseph, we know how it ended, so we know everybody lived happily ever after, sort of. So you don't realize that during the course of this, they didn't know the end of the story. It was a little different thing from them. And we think that, well, you know, they're Bible characters, so everybody was just right and did just what they were supposed to, and that's why it worked the way God wanted. And it's not really that way. We're going to look at Joseph, because he was a fella who could very easily have said, I'm a victim. Why bother? I'm just going to give up and quit. Because you think about Joseph. Now, to begin with, you think, well, what better family could you be born in? His great-grandfather was Abraham. His grandfather was Isaac. His father was Jacob. I mean, here he was. He was in the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If God's going to take care of anybody, he's going to take care of them, right? So you think he should have a great start. I mean, right? There's no reason for him to think he's a victim when you come in a family like that. But have you ever read the book of Genesis and thought about what you were reading? Think about Jacob. So let's start with his name, his father Jacob. Do you know what the word Jacob means in Hebrew? My first serious study Bible said it means supplanter, which, even though that's an English word, it didn't help me much because I didn't know what a supplanter was. I looked at another study Bible this week, and it means deceiver, fraud, deception. It's someone who takes another person's place by deception. So the name of Joseph's father was Sneaky. What a great start to your life. Now, did he live up to his name? He had a twin brother, right? His twin brother's name was Esau, and Esau was the older brother. But God had said, in the case of your family, the younger will be in charge of the older. The older will serve the younger. And so did Jacob wait to see how God was going to do it? No, he had to help God out. He talked his brother into selling him the birthright for a bowl of soup. Now, when you figure he was going to lead the family, a guy who would trade that responsibility for a bowl of soup probably shouldn't be leading anyway. But when you figure the younger brother was going to help God out by using a bowl of soup, that's probably not the best plan either. So his name means sneaky. Is that the only time he did it? No, a little later on, Isaac is going to bless Jacob and Esau. He says, bring him in and bless him. And his mom gets into a plot with him, and they pretend that he's his older brother, so his dad blesses him instead of Esau. And it gets to be so bad that he has to actually leave the area because his brother's kind of upset with him for doing that. That's Joseph's father. But, okay, sometimes people with character flaws in their personality can still be pretty good parents. You know, most of us are, well, everybody in this room is kind of flawed a little bit, and some of us are still trying pretty hard to be good parents. What was he like as a parent? Well, if you look in Genesis 34, one of his daughters gets raped. And you know what the statement is about it? When Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock, so he kept quiet about it until they came home. Well, when they come home, he still doesn't do anything, so his brothers get upset. But the guy who assaulted Dinah really wanted to marry her. I mean, he didn't go about the best way, but he really wanted to marry her. And so the brothers, I guess following in the pattern of their dad, they come up with a plan. They say, well, we will intermarry with you and you can intermarry with us if you'll get circumcised. And apparently this guy really wanted to marry her because he talked the whole village into getting circumcised. And 3 days later, Simeon and Levi come in and kill all the men in the village. Now, finally, Jacob is moved to say something, because now his daughter has been defiled. His sons have murdered all the men in the village. And you know what Jacob's response is? Now the people won't like me anymore. That's his statement. He's not upset about his daughter, about his sons. He's mad. He's concerned because the people in the area are not going to like him. Not a great approach to parenting. A little further on, in Genesis 35, we read this statement, verse 22. While Israel, that's Jacob's new name, while Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. One of Jacob's sons slept with his stepbrother's mother. And Jacob hears about it, and as far as we know, he doesn't do anything. So I'm not real sure his parenting was all that great. But what was probably one of the most notable deficiencies in his parenting? What does the little cartoon in the corner say? He had a son that was a favorite. Rachel was his favorite wife. Joseph was his favorite son. And he dressed Joseph up so that every time his brothers saw him, they were reminded, Dad likes you best. Dad likes you best. How's that for setting things up for a harmonious family? Now, sibling rivalry is pretty normal. We often don't get along with brothers and sisters, and guys have punch-ups and girls do it another way. But there's a problem, and Jacob is part of the cause of that. Now, it's not just your normal sibling rivalry. They're so upset with him that they want to kill him. And so Jacob is the leader of this household, and that's what it looks like. Now, if you're Joseph and you think, this is my family, how thrilled are you with that? Well, maybe, his dad was a bit of a challenge. Maybe his mom was better. We don't know as much about his mom, but we do know that when Jacob and Laban got to be so, Laban was his father-in-law. Jacob worked for 7 years to get Rachel, and then his father-in-law pulled a sneaky on him and gave him her sister Leah, and then he had to work 7 more years to get Rachel. Now, Rachel and, Laban and Jacob eventually start not to get along very well. And so Jacob decides it's time to leave town. And when he decides to leave town, Rachel and Leah say, yeah, we might as well go with you. Our dad's kind of written us off too. So Rachel steals the household gods. Now, that's just not like stealing the silverware from the house. These people really thought that these little household gods guaranteed health or prosperity or security. And Rachel, who had been married to Jacob for at least 7 years now, thought so much of Jacob's God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that she thought she needed to carry along these idols just in case to help things out. And then when her father finds out that the household idols are gone, he chases them down. And when he finds out, Jacob says, I don't know anything about him. If you find him, kill the one that's got him. Because he didn't know Rachel had taken them. And Rachel sits down in her tent. She hides them under a camel's saddle and sits down and says, I'm sorry, I can't get up. Please forgive me. You know how that is. Now, it may or may not have been the truth, but certainly she was deceiving her father. Interestingly enough, her father was probably not the greatest example because Jacob has just wandered off with two of his daughters, and all he wants is his household idols back. So you got some brilliant examples of family life. Rachel sits there and deceives her father face to face. Well, maybe he had, then there's Joseph's brothers. Maybe that's a little better, you think? Well, she's got his brothers. Well, Joseph gives a bad report. Jacob sends Joseph out to see what his brothers are up to, and he brings back a bad report. If you dob in your siblings, how popular do you become in your family? That didn't help. Then Jacob has these dreams. He says, God gave me these dreams, and one day all of you guys are going to bow down to me. Now, whether that was true or not, do you think that helped the relationship with his brothers? I'm going to be the boss one day. And so they're not just upset like your normal punch-up that brothers have. They want to kill him. They're ready to kill him. Jacob sends Joseph out to check on the brothers again. That was a smart move too, don't you think? And he says, well, let's kill him. But they don't kill him. You know why? I think 3 reasons why they didn't kill him. First reason is if you kill somebody, it hurts for a little while and then it's all over. And if you sell him as a slave, think how long the pain can last. So they wanted to make it last as long as possible. Second, if you just kill him, it's all gone. If we sell him, we get money. So they got 20 pieces of silver for him. Most of us probably have a sibling that we'd be glad to take 20 pieces of silver for, but they did. And the third thing is, and here's the important thing, God wasn't finished with Joseph yet. Whatever his family situation, his brothers were thinking, he wasn't finished with Joseph yet. God was not finished. So Joseph was not going to die until God was finished with him. Now, here's the thing. If you jump over to Genesis 39, second verse, the Lord was with Joseph. Now, he has been sold. I looked on a map. It's about 500 kilometers from where Joseph lived to where he was when he was Potiphar's slave. So, and on a camel caravan of traders, that took a long time to get there. So what do you think Joseph was thinking and feeling on the trip from his home down to Egypt? And the Lord was with Joseph. If the Lord was with you and it meant you grew up in a totally dysfunctional home with people who hated you, and God gave you a vision of a great thing that was going to happen, and then your circumstances changed so that, humanly speaking, it seemed impossible that vision would ever come true, and the whole reason you're being sold as a slave now is because you obeyed your father, and now you hear that God is with you. How many of you would want God to be with you if that's where you were going to end up? If that was where you ended up, would you want God to be with you? Why didn't he give up? I mean, if anybody had a right to be a victim, to feel himself as a victim, it was Joseph. I mean, look at the family he grew up in. How many of you picked the family you're in? You know? You don't get to pick your family. Really, some of us do. Okay, but you don't pick the family you're born into. Joseph didn't pick that, and what did he get? He got a sneaky father, a mother that didn't seem to be convinced whether the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was the right one, and a bunch of brothers that hated him. What hope did he have? Now, a lot of us face similar things in the sense that there are illnesses, there are circumstances, there are accidents and tragedies that we don't have any control over. How do you stop from feeling like a victim when those things are on you every day? You just can't get away from them. He had dreams. God had given him a vision. He says, one day you will rule over your brothers, even over your parents. And culturally, that just was an unheard of thing, that a son with 10 older brothers would actually rule over his brothers and even his parents. That just didn't happen. And so God says, yep, it's going to happen. And then almost immediately, he's shipped off to Israel, or to Egypt. And you think, how is that ever going to happen? What was God teasing me? Did God give me a vision of something that was that good just to take it away? And on top of that, I only did what God said. Obey your parents. My dad said, go check on my brothers. I did. I told them the truth when I came back. My brothers hate me. God gave me a dream. I told people what God showed me. And my brothers hate me even more. And then finally, my dad says, go check on your brothers again. I'm just doing what the Bible says I'm supposed to do. And what happens? My brothers sell me as a slave. And then it gets worse, because sometimes we're in a situation where we know what we're supposed to do, but we don't always know exactly how to go about it. I can remember an incident in my ministry 17 years ago. I can even tell you the day. I can't tell you the month. I'm not sure I can tell you the date. And there was something I needed to do as a part of my ministry. And I did it, and it blew up in my face. And I still look back and I think, I had to do something, but did I do the right thing, or did I do it the right way? And so on this trip down to Egypt, Joseph's probably thinking, I had to do that, but could I have done it better? Am I suffering like this because of some dumb things I did? Even if my motives were good, did I not do it very well? And you think, how can you overcome that? What can I do? What hope for me? I mean, why don't I give up? Why do you think Joseph didn't give up? In a situation like that, why didn't Joseph give up? I mean, he came from a bad background. He was given a vision by God that seemed to be taken away from him as soon as he got it. And now he's headed to be into slavery in Egypt. Why doesn't he give up? Got any answers to that? Why not? Would you? I mean, he was conditioned to fail. I mean, everything about it said, you're helpless. You're a victim. You can't do anything about this. You didn't pick your parents, and look what you got. You didn't pick your brothers, look what you got. All you did was doing what you were supposed to do, and look what you got. You're a victim. Why didn't he just give up? Well, because he found God at some point. Now, here's the point. What was important about his family lineage? We talk about the phrase occurs over and over in the Old Testament, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, we tend to focus on Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they were men of great faith. With all their flaws, they were men of great faith. But what should the focus be on? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You hear people talk about, well, I don't go to church anymore because there are too many hypocrites there. Well, it's not about the hypocrites that are there. It's about the God that we gather to seek. That's where it is. And somehow, through the distorted image that God, that his family, his parents, his grandparents had given him of God, somehow Joseph managed to see the real God, to see God as he really is. How many of us can say that we think we may have seen God the way he really is? Does that keep you from being a victim, do you think? To see God? I think if that wasn't it, why did Joseph not give up? He found God. Now, and here's how the man of or the person of God. Joseph's a man, but this could apply to a woman, a child, anybody. Now, think about Joseph's response to this. An interesting factor in this whole story is we're never told anything that Joseph feels. You read the whole story. I looked at it again this afternoon. Not once are we ever told anything about Joseph's feelings. See? We're not told anything. A few times we're told what he's thinking, but that doesn't happen until 22 years after these events that we're talking about tonight. It's when his brothers show up 22 years later that we find out some of the things that he's thinking. But you know what we do know? we know what he does. We know what he does. And so his response was not based on his circumstances. He didn't let his brother's situation, his father's shortcomings, he didn't let that determine how he lived his life or how he saw himself. He did not let the circumstances determine those things. He didn't do it based on feelings, because if he had responded, if we were in that position and we responded according to our feelings, how many of us would have ever had a success story written about us? He didn't respond based on how he felt. It was not according to his feelings that he responded. He didn't even do it based on his thinking, because if he did it on his thinking, God gave me a vision. I'm going to be the ruler over my family. I'm a slave in Egypt. How is that ever going to happen? How can you think that that would ever happen? So even his thinking didn't determine it. What he did respond in was obedience. He said, God, you have said this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to do it. Now, feelings are not bad, not wrong. We have feelings. God didn't have to make us with emotions. He did. They're helpful guides to what's going on around us and how we're responding and what we should be thinking and responding. He gave us a brain. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But what he says most importantly is, if you love me, keep my commandments. And that's what he did. Somehow, in all this distortion, Joseph saw God as he is, and he said, I'm going to obey him in spite of my circumstances, in spite of my feelings, in spite of the limitations of my own thinking. I am going to obey God. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to do what he says, as hard as it seems and as illogical as it seems. And here's what happens. Sometimes we think of becoming a Christian as taking a step of faith, and it is. But we often think that after we've taken that step of faith to become a Christian, then it's not about faith anymore, it's about keeping the rules. And it's not. Faith is this is the NIV, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. A little further on in that chapter, down in verse 6, it says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. And I'll give you, I've given you this before, but you know what my equation for faith is? My equation for faith. Faith is equal to risk plus God. If you are taking no risks, you are not living by faith. And Joseph took a risk. He obeyed God when it didn't make any sense at all. He was in a terrible situation, and next week we're going to hear more about the bad situations that he went into by obeying God. But he didn't let that determine his obedience. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. I like the old King James version of it. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. There is substance to our hope. It's not just a leap of faith. It's not just some kind of airy-fairy pie in the sky. Maybe it'll be okay one time. There is substance to our faith. God says, you live in this world. You look around. You see what I can do. There's substance to it, and there is evidence that what I say is going to happen will happen. The evidence of things not seen. I haven't seen heaven, but there's evidence that it exists. I don't know how the story's going to end. Joseph didn't know how the story was going to end, but he had seen enough evidence of God, even in his difficult, distorted, problematic upbringing, that he believed the evidence of the things that he hadn't seen yet. So if you want to know how to keep from being a victim, it's to find out what God really is like. And you won't find out necessarily just from your circumstances. You won't find out just from your feelings or just from your thought patterns. God tells you what he's like, and then you can look in the world and see what God has done and what he is still doing. And Joseph, in spite of the difficulty that he faced, he believed that what God said was going to happen, and the best way to live was in obedience to God in spite of how the circumstances looked. And in doing that, he never allowed himself to feel like a victim. As much as humanly speaking he appeared helpless, his faith said that there's evidence that what's going to happen is going to happen according to God's plan, even if I can't see that with my physical eyes. It's going to happen. Now, so you're not a victim. If you choose to behave like a victim, that's a choice you can make. But the God of this universe says, you're mine, and I have a plan for you. And it doesn't mean that we all get a trophy. It doesn't mean that we can do anything we want to apart from God's will. I know Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But it was all things in the context of what God has designed us to do. That will all take place. But sometimes it's a little hard to get our will in line with God's. And when we're trying to get God to agree with us, it's not going to work. But Joseph says, I agree with God. I'm going with him. And he never saw himself as a victim. He never did. And we don't have to see ourselves as victims. We all have problems, not just families. We have economic issues. We have health issues. We have other relational issues besides our family. We have accidents and diseases and all kind of things that could make us a victim. But we have a God that says you're not a victim and you don't have to be one. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you that you give us pictures like the life of Joseph, and we can see your hand at work. And even when we're in the middle of the story and it looks so dark, you're still there and you still work. You've told us in your Psalms, even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we don't have to fear evil. We are not victims. And we thank you for that. We are more than conquerors through Christ. Help us to remember that, to live like it, and to live in faith and obedience for Jesus' sake.